How long has China been an influence in Mexico? And when did you first find out? Was this happening, or were you aware of this happening when you were in Mexico?
Not specifically. I think there was an arrest of a Mexican Chinese national in Mexico who had a record as far as the amount of money that was found in his house. Zen Shi Legong, I think. I don't remember the name clearly, but he was basically somebody that was involved in the pharmaceutical industry in Mexico. Chinese Mexican national. He had over $100 million worth of cash in his house.
Holy fuck.
The stack was about the height of this table. Gold, all you name it. His house was just basically this giant money pit. And the government, the federal government, obviously took this money and made it disappear. And he got involved in some sued the Mexican government. There was this whole case around it, but that was the first sign of very public sign of Chinese national involvement in some of the issues related to precursors coming into the country, and what the pipeline might look like as far as some of these products and precursors to create meth or to construct meth in Mexico. And also the proliferation of some of these chemists, Chinese chemists, actually teaching or bringing some of the equipment to Mexico to create some of these substances in Mexico. Some of the first fentanyl production facilities in Mexico were kind of found around that time. I mean, this is this Felipe Calderon administration era. So that kind of started being a thing, specifically around meth production, not fentanyl, but fentanyl started kind of looming in the background. Meth production in Mexico and the quality of meth that was produced in Mexico that was better than anything was being produced stateside. The things that inspired probably that series here in the U.S., the Breaking Bad series.
Breaking Bad, yeah.
Yeah, the whole finding these giant crystal shards that are clear and the quality in them coming from Mexico into the United States. And some of these industrial level laboratories in Mexico kind of popping up. And who was showing them how to cook it, how to create it, and some of the equipment to make it. And the precursors to make these were Chinese sourced. So that's kind of, as far as on my radar, that's when they first kind of started popping up as a player in Mexico.
What is the motive? What do you think the primary motive is of developing and helping produce all this stuff in Mexico and traffic it around the world? Do you think it's financial motivations, or is there something else?
So there's no criminal enterprise in China that's happening without the government knowing about it.
Right.
There's no Chinese mafia moving fentanyl and having an alliance with Mexican cartels. That doesn't exist. That shouldn't really kind of make sense to anybody.
So it's impossible to have some rogue organization that's not tied to government there.
It's impossible for anything coming in and out of China without the Chinese government knowing about it and not doing anything about stopping it.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So there's a pipeline of fentanyl coming out of China into Mexico and into the United States as well through a lot of ports, probably Canada as well. So there's a pipeline of precursors to make methamphetamines and also to make fentanyl coming into Mexico and other parts of the world, but specifically Mexico. That is happening under the watchful eye of China, right? This is produced in laboratories and chemical plants in China that are clearly under supervision of somebody up there. There's people have gone out there to report on these things. All you have to do is change a molecule in some of these substances and it turns into something else. So there's people out there manufacturing and making these things and kind of circling back and engineering some of these things. But whatever it is, it's coming out of China with Chinese know-how. They know about it. I don't know if they're making money off it and the government's like using it to fund anything, but they know about it and they're not doing anything about it, basically. That's one part of it. Another part of it is basically all the money that's made off some of these processes and some of these trafficking and distribution networks sometimes goes into Chinese money laundering networks and banking networks. 2 years ago, there was a news breaking about Chinese banking apps used by Chinese money brokers stateside to basically take money earned from sales and distribution in the United States to go into the Chinese banking system, basically disappearing from U.S. eyes, and then materializing in Mexico with another money broker down there. So even in that case, there's an involvement, as far as moving money and moving funds from one part to another. Now, this is a place where people have social credit,
right?
Where people are being watched, where there's people that can't move from one part of the country to another. This is Big Brother area. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing happening there without them knowing. How is it possible for these criminal enterprises to be operating completely in the open and utilizing some of these systems that they're completely supervised and under supervision without the Chinese government knowing about it and knowing what they do or what they do with those funds or where those funds come from? They either don't care or they are seeing it as a way to affect this country and saying, oh, that's a pretty interesting thing that's happening with this whole process. Let's just not do anything about it.
Is the United States the biggest country, or is it the most affected by fentanyl deaths? Do you know? I
don't know about if it's the most affected by fentanyl deaths. I think from what I see in the amounts of the numbers that are being reported, it's clearly that's killing a major amount of people and in youth.
Some of the arguments I've heard of China trying to specifically disrupt America is that this is happening in a bunch of other countries that nobody's talking about.
I mean, there's fentanyl deaths in Mexico. There's a giant market in Mexico, but that doesn't matter to Americans, I guess. People dying in Mexico from fentanyl related deaths, but it definitely happens. I don't come from the war college. I'm not somebody that's involved in international geopolitics or war scenarios. But if you wanted to affect the United States in a big way, you would, if you can't attack it directly militarily because you guys want to spend more than any other country on the planet as far as your military industrial complex.
Right.
You attack it indirectly.
Yeah.
And one of the most indirect ways of attacking it is through your youth. And influence. I think the fact that the NBA can't say things like Taiwan is a country is mind blowing to me. In this, that to be living through a day and age when the U.S. when the private entity like the NBA can't have its players say that Taiwan isn't a country, that Taiwan's a country, or else they'll get, So there's talk about the influence and censorship that's going on,
Right.
So that I think they're very much playing the long game as far as influence in this country, and their pipeline as far as fentanyl, and their completely passive reactions to its banking institutions and monetary systems being utilized to move around money.
So they're sending chemists over here, and the cartels are working directly with Chinese chemists, and they're teaching them how to manufacture this fentanyl.
That's something that's been documented, and it's happened a few times. Yeah, that's already documented, and that's happened. Yeah,
and how does that benefit these, like the Sinaloa cartel? Does that just save them money?
Yeah, it's a money saver. I mean, they don't have to go to, even though. So another thing to kind of think about as far as some of these criminal groups in Mexico. They operate in all the way down to Colombia now. There's factions of the Sinaloa and the New Generation Cartel operating in Colombia at the source. I mean, they're not taking control of the whole operation, but they're already down there, kind of like basically doing this. They hand it over,
Wow, man.
They're in Northern Africa. They're in Europe. There's networks of them that are now trying to find a way into like places like Australia. They're everywhere.
Jesus.
As far as their, if they can figure out a way to produce and not depend on anybody, that makes it more money. When COVID happened, it was a big hit to some of these groups because they couldn't get access to precursors and fentanyl specifically. it was interesting that you had cartels that were on the Pacific side that had control over some of the Pacific side ports in Mexico, like the new generation cartel actually grow during this time period because they had access to the Pacific side ports, which led into a route directly to China. Even during COVID, they were getting supplied. So that's, again, interesting phenomenon of that. But you see this this whole proliferation is specifically around fentanyl and kind of cartels and criminal groups moving into manufacturing and creating it for themselves. You know, that's going to be the moneymaker in the future. So if you can figure out how to basically develop that industry and stabilize it there, it's going to be just a supply line.